Hey up everyone, welcome to the Rugby League History channel. I hope you're all well. Tonight's video is going to be me St. George Illawarra Dragons NRL 2020 season review, and we're going to get into that shortly. But before that, if you're enjoying the content that I'm making, if you're enjoying what I'm doing and you haven't subscribed to the channel already, make sure that you click that subscribe button and that notification bell. I'm getting close to 250 subscribers. We're up to 238 at the moment. But I'm hoping to get to 250 by the end of the week. So without further ado, let's get into the review. St. George Illawarra, they finished the season in 12th place. They had a win-loss record of 7 wins and 13 losses, a points differential of -74, and out of their last 10 games, 3 wins and 7 losses. At the start of the season, before the ball was kicked, I tipped St. George to come 14th. I didn't really expect much from St. George this year. And we're going to go into some of their results now. I've been doing this with all the other clubs. I've done the Manly review, I've done the North Queensland, Canterbury and Brisbane reviews. Go check those out. So St. George, they kicked off the year against West Tigers, round 1. At Wynn Stadium, and it didn't get off to a good start for St. George. They lost that match 24 points to 14 at Wynn Stadium. And then the next week I thought that they had a good crack at Penrith. This is before we knew Penrith were going to go on that magic run. And they were in a winning position in that game, and they lost 32 points to 28. Now, after that, the NRL season was stopped momentarily. We had about 1 or 2 months off due to the COVID-19 pandemic. When we come back, St. George kind of went from, you could see, bad to worse. They lost 18-0 against New Zealand in round 3 at the Central Coast Stadium. And then they were outclassed by a very, you could see in the weeks prior, a very poor Canterbury side, 22 points to 2. And at that stage, everyone was kind of applying the blowtorch to Paul McGregor. They see he shouldn't be the coach of St. George anymore. We have to get shot of him, all that caper. And then St. George come out and won their next 2 games. They won the local derby against Cronulla Sutherland, 30 points to 16. And then they also beat the Gold Coast 20 points to 8. And then they had two weeks where they had very gutsy performances. Even though they were the second best team in these ones, they really put in a good effort. And there was a few people saying, if they can play like that against some other teams, they'll pick up some wins. So in round 7, they lost 26 points to 12 against Eastern Suburbs, but that's not really an indication of the way that St. George played that day. And then they lost 22 points to 16 against Canberra. So in those 2 matches, they put in some good performances, and they beat Manly 34 points to 4 at Cogra Oval. That was a good win for St. George. And then they had another win over Canterbury, where they really shouldn't have won that game, but thanks to Marcelo Montoya, they ended up winning that match. Round 11, they had the game where you could see that a referee blunder cost them the match against Cronulla in the local derby. They lost that 28 points to 24. And then the following week, they're up, I think, about 16-18-0 against South at Cogra Oval in round 12, and they lost 32 points to 24. And then after round 13, Paul McGregor was finally, you could see, terminated by St. George. They come in and said, look, we just don't think that you're the right person for the job anymore. He was allowed to sit on the sideline and coach his final match, which was against Parramatta. And I think this is one of their best performances of the year. They beat Parramatta 14 points to 12. Then they responded the week after with a win over Brisbane, 28-24. And then after that, the last 3 or 4, 5 matches of the year, St. George went back to their early season form. They were beaten by North Queensland, Canberra, Newcastle, and the Gold Coast. The match against the Gold Coast pretty much ended their top 8 hopes. They were a faint hope of making the top 8. And then their final match of the year, they had the win over Melbourne, a very depleted Melbourne side, 30 points to 22 at Cogra. So that was the year for St. George. Now, going into the stats, the player stats. Zach Lomax was the top point scorer, 178. Top try scorer with 13 tries, joint top try scorer with Matt Duffy. Matt Duffy had the highest try assist of the year with 12. He had the most run meters, Matt Duffy, with 286. He had the most runs of the year, 286. Most run meters went to Matt Duffy as well, 2,727, which was more than any of the front rowers for St. George. And the line breaks went to Michaeli Ravalawi. Now, in that side this year, the St. George, they had some, even though they had a poor year, they did have some good performers. I thought Matt Duffy was smashing in some matches. I thought Cameron McInnes never gave up. He was always leading by example, trying his hardest. He was a good player. Zach Lomax was also very good. Surprisingly, in some matches, Ewan Aiken wasn't too bad. But I think one problem for St. George this year was that players like Tyson Frizzell went missing. Paul Vaughan in a lot of matches went missing. Corey Norman was shite. They also had some issues with Ben Hood as well. James Graham left the club. If I was to choose the best player of the year for St. George, I would go with Zach Lomax. I think he had a breakout year this year. I thought he was a smashing player this year for the club, and I think Matt Duffy would come a close second. Matt Duffy was another standout for St. George this year. If I was to go for probably their best win of the year, their best win of the year for me was either the match against Manly, where they won 34 points to 4. I think that was probably their most perfect match of the year. They got everything right in that game, and also the match against Parramatta, where they won 14 points to 12. They weren't perfect in that game, but it was a really gutsy win, and it was a good way to send out Paul McGregor as the head coach. Now, towards the back end of the year, St. George, they appointed Dean Young, former Premiership winning player, as the interim coach, and then they announced that Anthony Griffin was going to be the head coach of the club. If you don't know who Anthony Griffin is, he was the head coach of Brisbane and also Penrith. Now, going into the crystal ball for next year, they're losing Tyson Frizzell. That's a big loss, despite the fact that he hasn't played well this year. They might, I think, be moving on Corey Norman. I'm not too sure, but I think that they should move him on. There's going to be a couple of other changes going in at St. George. They've got a whole new sort of coaching staff that Anthony Griffin's brought along. If you've watched me Anthony Griffin appointment video, I think it's a good appointment. I think he's a good coach. He was treated pretty poorly at Penrith. I think he's still got a point to prove in the NRL. Going into next year, St. George have got a lot to work on. I think Anthony Griffin will make them a better side. I still don't see them making the top 8, but I think they'll finish just outside the top 8. But I think from what you've seen of them this year, they'll be a vastly improved side next year. We'll have to see who they release and what type of room they've got left in the salary cap, if they can bring in some players. But they've got some good backs, and they've still got Paul Vaughan and a couple of decent forwards there. So they do have a team to build, and it'll be interesting to see how St. George go next year, but I think that they'll finish just outside the finals in 2021. Anyway, that's me 2020 season review for St. George. I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did, click that like button. And if you're enjoying the content that I'm doing and all the videos, playlists that I've done, click that subscribe button. Make sure that you share the videos with your friends and family, get their opinion. Anyways, everyone, I'm going to get out of here. And I'll see you all tomorrow. I'm going to be doing my next team season review tomorrow. So, catch us all later, everyone. Look after yourselves. Tatty bye.